Today's reading is from Luke, and it covers the story of Jesus, a poor, pathetic guy who's possessed of demons and a herd of pigs who end up in the lake. Many years ago, I took a trip to Israel, and it was quite an extensive trip, and I was learning a little bit about archaeology at the time, and that was the time when I subscribed to Bar magazine. Turned out to be a big disappointment. It was Biblical Archaeology Review. Maybe it could have been about something else, being Bar magazine. But anyway, I digress. But you go back a couple of hundred years ago, and higher criticism would postulate that there was no such thing as a kingdom and a king named David. And then, of course, archaeology dug up the city of David. Revealed that the stories about David taking the fortress of the Jebusites and making it the city of David was actually authentic. And then there were numerous other things that were established to be authentic. Now, a fanciful story like Jesus and a guy possessed of demons and pigs, that couldn't really happen, could it? Seems for, a bunch of pigs to go over a cliff, let's say, that, you go around the Sea of Galilee and there are no cliffs. Well, maybe there is one area over here that there are kind of some cliffs. And so as we got on the boat and we chugged across the Sea of Galilee, the guide said, oh, by the way, this is where this event happened. And we know it happened because thanks to those who dig things up, they read the account, and the story is told that this guy comes running out of a graveyard to yell at Jesus. And this seemed to be the only place that could possibly happen. And so they set to finding, was there ever a graveyard in this area? And a couple of hundred yards from where the only place that really this could have happened, there turned out to be, buried under millennia of dirt and garbage and everything else, the evidence of an ancient graveyard. And so, with authority, the guide said, this is where it happened. And it was, one of 1,000 little things that reinforced my confidence in the gospel accounts as being first-hand accounts. Just as we go through Genesis, which is written off as a bunch of fanciful stories, wow. When it says Abraham went from here to here to here, we discover that there are places buried under millennia of dirt that were villages that really answer to the name that is mentioned in Genesis. And all of these little things built upon one, upon the other, authenticate the stories of Genesis. And this particular story authenticates the eyewitness accounts that are preserved by Luke in his gospel. We're going to read from Luke chapter 8 and verse 26. We begin, they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it has seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he'd broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. Now, that's a first-hand account of something incredible that took place. And at the core of the story, you see Jesus' compassion. You see his power to deliver. But ironically, you also see Jesus acting out of purpose. And his actions lead to a very deliberate end. And so this demon-possessed individual is delivered, and I would say he was delivered for a purpose. And if you come back with me to the beginning of this story, it says they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. So Jesus has gone from his home district into an area that is Gentile. You might say, what was your first clue? Answer, pigs. Okay, they didn't raise pigs in Israel of that day. They still don't raise pigs in Israel of this day either. However, there are quite a few Arabs who live in Israeli territory, and they all like it a bacon. So what to do? Well, I'll tell you what to do, especially if you're an entrepreneurial Jew. You raise pigs and sell them. But you can't raise pigs on the land of Israel, right? So what you do is you put them into a pig pen that is raised above the land of Israel. Just like chickens. You know, sometimes you put them in a chicken coop and they can poop on the ground, but they can't step on the ground. Same thing for the pigs. So, to this day, it is illegal for a pig to set land. Well, it may not be illegal, but pigs don't put their trotters on the land of Israel. They just poop on the land of Israel. It's all within the law. So if you're a legalist, it works for you, you see. This is the irony of law-based administration. You can figure a way around it some way or another. Jesus used to argue about that. But anyway, he goes to the land of the Gerasenes. And in a way, he's sort of getting away from the stresses and strains of the Galilee area. Because up there, they're after him constantly. Hey, will he feed us today? I bought a lunch. Would you like to feed 5,000 out of this packed lunch? What are you going to do? We heard you once turn water into wine. Fish and muffins, that's impressive. But water into wine? Huh? No. A lot of stresses and strains. And the disciples are at times run ragged. So there are numerous examples of Jesus going up to the area of Tyre and Sidon. Just get away for a little bit, take a break. And also here he goes away across the lake to the Decapolis, the area of the 10 cities. And this is a Gentile area. But when he steps ashore, he's met by a demon-possessed man from the town. Now, this individual is under the control of demons. He doesn't speak for himself. He is literally possessed by demons. Now, you might say, do we have that today? And it's possible, okay? And I have sat with one or two who claim to be channeling or have familiar spirits. I've never met anybody who is flat out demon possessed, I've never met anybody who would fit in, anybody ever see the movie The Exorcist? I've heard one or two stories of people who have claimed they've seen individuals levitate and do strange things. But one of the great lessons of the cross is that at the Last Supper, Jesus said, this is the end of Satan's rule on this earth. And so today we do not see the phenomena that Jesus ran across constantly, which was to see people who were demon-possessed, and it was very obvious. Okay, we don't, you may see people who have a measure of mental illness. You may see people who are not living normal lives by our standards, but you don't have people yelling and screaming all the time and speaking from the point of view of a demon possession. Okay, now I have gone to the homes for those who are mentally challenged, and yes, I have seen some people who are in very, very difficult circumstances. But here you gather together people who are deeply troubled, and maybe there are some there who are in that particular state. But when you go to a crowded room, I went when I was a young person. I went to what was called a mental hospital on the outskirts of London, and out of millions and millions of people living in that area, there was a very small number of people confined to that institution. Here we have a time and a place where people were frequently approaching Jesus, and he frequently was casting out demons, and this is one of those occasions. And this individual is under the control of demons. And for a long time, this man had not worn clothes. So he was just totally and completely shunned by the township. He doesn't live in a house, it says. He's destitute. He lives in the tombs. Both symbolically and literally, he is among the dead. He sleeps in a graveyard. We don't even know how he is provided food. Maybe there are some sympathetic relatives, just as there were there at that time when people were shunned and kept at a distance, understandably so, because they were leprous and family had to feed them. Now, I've heard stories like that in some third world countries where individuals who are thrown in jail, they literally don't provide them with food, and they have to depend on relatives to come and give them whatever they're going to have to eat. I've heard stories about that in the Philippines and in Africa. But imagine this individual. You read over it quickly and you think, oh, that's an entertaining story. But imagine this, how pathetic this individual is. When you see in a movie where somebody is supposedly demon-possessed, it's sort of like, well, whatever. You see somebody who is horribly destitute, the Hunchback of Notre Dame or something like that, shunned by the community, kept at as great a distance as possible. And here we are, both with the imagery and the reality of the desperation of this individual. In fact, this individual doesn't have enough self-awareness to even know how desperate his situation is. If he was self-aware, he might try to cover himself with some sort of clothing, but he's not even aware of that. And so you can't get more distant from sanity, distant from the community than this individual is. And again, it's just both powerful imagery and also powerful reality that this individual is living. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice. Now, yes, he cries out, but it's the demons who have possessed him, who posed the question, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." Now, this is a theme throughout Jesus' ministry. He begins by going into the wilderness and facing down, quote, the prince of this world. And the prince of this world has many minions of fallen angels who are referred to as demons. These are individuals who are under restraint now more than ever before, who don't have the run of the world, which they kind of used to do before Jesus' time. The very first prophecy of Genesis is what? You're going to think that you will defeat him. You will strike at his heel, but he will crush your head. And so throughout Jesus' ministry, he begins by setting Satan in his place. And then suddenly he is a focal point for all the demons who come gathering around and say, what's going on? You've defeated the boss. Now what's going to happen to us? And there's an awareness that eventually they come under judgment and they will be out of business. But right now, they don't know how this is going to work itself out. And so when Jesus appears and they see him as the Son of the Most High God, they anticipate right then and there eternal damnation, torment, torture, all of these things. And of course, at the cross, it tells us that Jesus, the Last Supper, he says, this is it for the prince of this world. And so for the last 2,000 years, we have not seen the type of world in which Jesus conquered Satan and put some of these things back in a corner. Here they are begging him, it says, not to visit us with our incredible damnation and fate that awaits us. He has commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. And many times it has seized him. And so there are times of calm when he sleeps, perhaps, but there are times of frenzy when he is overpowered physically, not just mentally and emotionally, but physically. And though there have been times when they've tried in the township to restrain him, to chain him hand and foot, and keep him under guard, because if he roams around yelling at people and disturbing people, that's something that we can't tolerate. Even today, if somebody acts out on the LRT or on the bus, they will be immediately restrained, especially in this day and age when people are rather sensitive. When I was a kid, if there was somebody sitting in the back of the double-decker bus muttering to themselves, well, whatever. But today we're far more aware of those things, and we say we don't want any trouble, any violence, any this, any that. Some years ago, I went to the office, social services office, with somebody who suffered with schizophrenia. And I was sitting on one side of the individual, and on the other side was Garrett Houghton. And we were trying to help this individual. And as we went through certain things with the social worker, we handed over some papers. And at one particular point, she handed back some papers, and I reached out and took them. And the individual sitting between us objected to that, and somehow or other made a dramatic gesture. And with that, without any hesitation, she hit the button, a siren went off, and there was an emergency declared right in the office. And of course, the client we were trying to help, he didn't know what was happening really, I suppose, and he would just calm down instantly. Garrett never really panicked. I may have shown something on my face like, but I didn't do anything. And so we just sat there and stared at the lady for about 5 seconds. And the door flew open, and in came a male manager, and he began to, lecture us on inappropriate behavior, and they wouldn't suffer this, and they wouldn't suffer that, and they wouldn't suffer violence, they wouldn't suffer abuse, they would not. Nothing's happening here. Bob's peaceful, Garrett's peaceful. The guy in the middle is just sitting there. And the social worker, of course, she's sitting there. And he sort of ran out of words. Well, I guess there's no real emergency here, but don't let it happen. And with that, he left the office, And so if you could imagine the sensitivity that we have, I'm sure that these individuals, when they had somebody who they were restraining, and he broke the chains, okay, that set off so many alarm bells. It was a 5-alarm fire emergency as far as they were concerned. We just don't live with things like that today. Here is an individual who's chained hand and foot, and they got a guard on him. And he's broken his chains. Now, I don't know how heavy his chains were, but whether or not this is a slight illustration or whatever, but anyway, the point is this individual is uncontrollable. And he's driven, it says, by demons. And so the alienation and the separation from the rest of community is pretty dramatic. And that's why he ends up in a yard full of gravestones, or a yard full of, now, of course, in the Jewish tradition, you'd be buried above ground, and perhaps in a cave or something like that, as Jesus was committed at his death. But here in the Gentile area, you're just sort of kind of being buried. And he is literally not only alienated, not only separated from the community, he is dead. He is with the dead. He's emotionally and spiritually dead as far as they're concerned. As you look at the illustrations that are being given, it's pretty obvious that this is kind of a way of describing the human condition. We are chained. Many people will describe what are really physical things like addictions or habits as, quote, spiritual strongholds. There are spiritual implications, and there's a spiritual cause. The spiritual cause is that we are alienated from our Father in heaven. We are at a distance. We're driven by needs, whatever those needs are, the need for acceptance, the need to be heard, all of these things. And of course, we all deserve to be heard, and we all would like to be free from addictions, but especially in this overly sensitive time that we live, these things become huge issues, huge issues. And so this is a very good representation of the human condition. And however you want to describe it, we are in all, we suffer from alienation from God, separation from God. We suffer from things that oppress us, addictions, codependencies, whatever else you might consider calling them. All of us are burdened in many different ways. And so this individual is a dramatic representation of a world separate from normacy. And normacy is a relationship with God, because we were created to be with the family of God, to be the children of God. And we were not. We are not. And Jesus, now dealing with this individual, asks him, "What is your name?" And the response is Legion. Now, in the world that Jesus is functioning, the strongest, most powerful representation is the Roman military. And a Roman legion, it's hard to equate. Perhaps I could say, if you want to know what represents the strength of a nation, we would say our army. More than that, our Marines, let's say. They're the first in. They're the guys who get the job done. And so if you want to represent, especially the United States, if there are problems in anywhere in the world, it's the Marines who go in there. It may be Delta Force, something like that. And so when the answer comes back, the term legion doesn't mean to say thousands and thousands of demons crammed into one person, but it means we come from power. We come from strength. We are the Delta Force. What's your name? Well, we are the Delta Force, but you're bigger than us. This is strange. This is scary. And we thought we had all power, but many demons have gone into him. And now Jesus is confronting them and calling them out, ordering them out. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. Now, I don't know exactly what the abyss is, but darkness, I think it is James who will speak of the demons and those who are against God as foaming out their shame like waves on the shore. Their destiny being darkness and oblivion. Even those who are willing to just not accept God is God, and they're not. Jesus describes them as departing with weeping and gnashing of teeth and anguish into darkness, oblivion. And so this imagery is represented to the listeners as being their fear. We don't want to go into darkness. We don't want to go into oblivion. We are powerless. We have nowhere. Somebody once said, what does a demon want? He wants a house and a job, okay? He wants to possess. He wants somewhere to live and express himself, and his job is to dominate and disrupt through the person he lives in. Well, this is what it seems to be in this particular case. Just don't cast us out. Don't disenfranchise us. And of course, at this point, there's a large herd of pigs feeding there on the hillside. And so they begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs. It's how demons see humanity. That's how they see us. We're animals. I mean, after all, they came from a superior creation in terms of power and in glory and in, whatever else you want to attribute to them. They, even though they're fallen angels, were still angels. And what's lower than an angel? Humanity. And so as far as they're concerned, we rate up there or down there with the pigs. And of course, again, the imagery of Jesus allowing them, casting them into what is considered unclean is quite consistent. And so this is what they beg for. This is where they want to go. Let us possess something. And he gave them permission because in the presence of God, they just can't do whatever they want to do. And Jesus' view is to let the unclean go to where the unclean belong with the unclean. Now, if you happen to have bacon, that's okay. Jesus very specifically in the book of Mark, it says, there's no meat that is unclean. The whole imagery of uncleanness taught Israel to discern and to count, That's just good, bad. I had a dinner with one of my grandkids here last week, and part of the platter that came had shrimp on. And so I said, you like shrimp? Hope. Yes, I do. So she got the shrimp, and I got the little biscuit with the avocado on. And it was a fair deal, but I can't face shrimp because I never ate them. And I must admit, I just don't like the thought of pork, even though I have memories of my grandfather when I was about 5 years old, taking me to the seaside, giving me a bag of winkles and a pin. You know what a winkle is? It's a really, really, really tiny snail. And they pickle them in brine. And so he said, here you are, Bob. There's a pin. Go to it. And so apparently I took out the inside of these winkles and ate them, The things that old people do to youngsters are just unbelievable. But anyway, and I remember going many years ago to Vancouver for some meetings, and they had a beautiful buffet lunch, and I saw some what I thought was Swiss air-dried beef, and I ate it for a couple of days, and it was delicious. And on the third day, it wasn't there, and I said, whatever happened to the Swiss air-dried beef? They looked at me like I was weird. They said, we didn't have any air-dried beef. I said, but it tastes just like this air-dried beef I had like decades ago at the Swiss Center in London. And it was such fond memories. He said, oh, you mean the prosciutto ham? Oh, so I was eating prosciutto ham, was I? Never mind. So, it's just a mental mindset here. But if you enjoy bacon, I know on the rare occasion that the burger comes with bacon, I give it to my partner, and she eats for two of us. And that's absolutely fine. But here the pigs are ceremonially, okay, and according to the law of Moses, unclean. And so this is a vivid illustration of where the unclean go. And they beg to go to some place that, well, I guess you won't miss these, will you, Jesus? When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs. The herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. As I said, the guide said there's only one place on this whole shoreline where there's a steep enough bank to lose a herd of pigs, right there. And if you doubt anymore that we have located the place, just a short distance away we found, surprise, surprise, a graveyard, which nobody knew existed until we challenged this passage from Luke. The herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. Well, of course they did. Consider the economic impact of losing your herd. This is your wealth. You know, as a kid, I spent time on my grandfather's dairy farm. And some years later, I remember my Aunt Mary, who still raised cattle and married a dairy farmer herself, said that there was more money in pigs. Well, I didn't know that. And so economically, there's money in chickens, there's money in milk, and there's a lot of money in pigs, or at least there was back then in England. And so these individuals have just lost a herd. The economic impact, the shock at seeing this take place, the anguish of what's happening. They run into town and say, hey, there's a crazy man there who just destroyed our livelihood. And the people went out to see what had happened. And of course, when they came, they found Jesus, but they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet. Now he's dressed, and he's in his right mind. And they were afraid. This individual had power. And sometimes when Jesus enters into the circumstances, the normal is no longer normal. The familiar is no longer familiar. And that can be threatening. It's supposed to be life-changing. But for some people, it is life-changing as far as they're concerned in the wrong direction. As far as they're concerned, I don't like the idea. Anybody who goes into, let's say, a recovery program is both frightened of what their addictions has done to them. They're also frightened of living without the powder, without the juice. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day, and he said, I may not be around after next week. I said, oh, why is that? He said, well, I got to go to court, and they're going to tell me what's going to happen to me. Well, why are you going to court? Well, I was dealing drugs. Oh, which ones? Well, coke. And then followed a conversation as to where you get the coke at the wholesale level and how you distribute it at the retail level, and the accompanying addictions and a few other things. And to his credit, he had taken the recommendations and he had gone into counseling. And I mean, it's 2 or 3 times a week, either Alcoholics Anonymous, where they will take you in and support you through recovery, or Addictions Anonymous, or one of the other recovery groups. And so these things are happening to people who are not in their right minds. They are dysfunctional, or whatever word you want to use. And so when they're challenged by, you need to, quote, clean up your act, or you're going to jail for a year. It's that serious. Well, whoa, now I'm frightened. I'm afraid. And when Jesus enters into an individual's life, and they become aware of what he asks or what he is going to require, or what is going to have to change, the norm for them may well be, as it was for this young man, well, I buy wholesale, I do it retail, and I sniff the profits up my nose. And that's how I live. And now, of course, you know, what can I argue before the judge? And so the only thing he could argue was, or his lawyer could argue was, I'm now more normal. I'm a responsible father to a 2-year-old. I'm a responsible employee. Here, I got a record to show it. I'm responding to all the recommendations in my life. But it's a big, big change. And going from whatever money he was making as a drug retailer to a minimum wage job, and working all sorts of hours that he's not used to working. That was a big disruptive thing. Answering to a boss, big disruptive thing. And here, as Christians, we promote to others sitting at Jesus' feet. I don't sit at anybody's feet. That you clothe yourself differently. I clothe myself the way I want to clothe myself. That you come to a right mind. I'm all right. No, you're not. Things have got to alter in your thinking and your feeling and in your being. And that can bring about fear. And this is exactly what the response is. Hey, we don't understand what's going on here. You're a Jew, we're Gentiles. You just destroyed a herd of pigs as far as we're concerned. And those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Whoa, we don't see that every day. In fact, we've never seen that before. And so the response is, then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. I remember many years ago, anybody ever heard of General Patton? You must have heard of Patton. Okay. One of those larger-than-life individuals from the Second World War. You know, he got into trouble from time to time, and they stood him down. But when things were tough, Churchill was known to say, can't we get Patton out of mothballs? Can't this person do an end run like Patton? Or can't, and he was a great admirer of the American general, Patton. And Patton lived a fearless life. And he was a great commander of men, a great leader of men. Went pilgrimage to the desert outside Barstow to go and see the museum. It's kind of a humble place, but the museum where they have preserved certain memorabilia and where he for some time taught tank warfare in the desert to his troops. But Patton was quoted as saying there was only one he didn't fear anything in life really, but he feared the call. I said, well, what do you mean he feared the call? He feared that Jesus would somehow or other enter into his life with something he didn't expect. A requirement, a change, a sacrifice. He feared the call, the letting go of the familiar. And I don't know what he anticipated that may be. Perhaps he thought that he would be called to go to a monastery, or called to take on vows of poverty, or called to take on vows of humility or something crazy in his thinking. But he feared the call. These are people who are overcome with fear, and they say to Jesus, leave us alone. And Jesus, feeling that it is not the right time or the right place, this is not the right audience, gets in the boat and leaves. And of course, the man from whom the demons have gone out begged to go with him. Why wouldn't he? You're the guy who woke me up and brought me to normalcy. You're the guy who put clothes on me. Probably asked his disciples, anybody got a spare cloak? Anybody got anything extra they could give this man? I created him. I know what a naked man looks like, but enough already. And by the way, somebody take him down to the lake and help him wash. Okay? Anybody spare soap? Whatever, if they had soap back then. Anybody got a spare lunch? You going to feed 5,000? No, I'm going to feed him. Don't be silly. This is not the time or place for that. Feed the guy. And so here he has been suddenly nurtured and made free and given some respect for the first time in his memory by Jesus. And he asks to go with him. You're going to go over to the... And Jesus sent him away. He said, no, not the time or place. But there is a reason for your deliverance. Return home and tell how much God has done for you. My miracles have many purposes. But for you, my friend, I have two purposes. First of all, to liberate you and to let you know your Father, who is the God of heaven and earth, and you can meet him through me. And secondly, for you to tell the story, to live the story, to be a living illustration of the story of what it is to know your Father in heaven. And as you think about that, you say, well, what is the purpose of my life in the context of Jesus saying, you're the salt of the earth? Okay. You're the light that's hidden on the hill. Hidden on the hill. No, I beg your pardon. Set on a hill, just like a city is set on a hill. You cannot be hidden. You must not be hidden. In some way or other, your life story that you both live and illustrate has to have an impact on others. You are liberated. You are freed, but for a purpose. And you think about that, well, where does that take me? Well, of course, it takes you, especially as a grandparent, okay? Perhaps as a grandfather this weekend, perhaps as a grandmother this weekend. It takes you to a place where you have a powerful living story that in some way or other has to roll into the lives of your children and your grandchildren, into the lives that you interact with at work or in the social circumstances, wherever you are. You know, I remember years ago listening to Tony Campolo. Anybody ever heard of him? Tony Campolo. I'm sure you, at some time or another, he's written dozens of books. He's actually a professor of sociology in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but he may have retired by now. But I remember some years ago going to Sherwood Park and hear him speak. And one of the illustrations, whether I heard him on that weekend or in another context, I don't know, but he talked about growing up in a Baptist church and going to communion with his father. And his father was a no-nonsense, pretty tough guy, Italian. He was a bricklayer. He may have even come from the old country. But he said he sat there with his dad, and they heard the typical hellfire and brimstone, I suppose, that day. And at the close of the service, they took communion. And he said the plates came by, and in the context of the sermon of that day, he said there was a young woman sitting right in front of them. And this young woman had a child, obviously out of wedlock, as far as he could see. And she was just sitting there by herself with her child. And the communion plates were being passed. And they came to her, and she must have been in some way quietly sobbing because she was passing the plate right past her. Her life was not worthy. She was not worthy. This was something that she just, in the context of whatever she heard or felt, this wasn't the time or place for her to take communion. And he said his dad, the bricklayer, he said, big old meaty hands, from a lifetime of manual labor, and a rough and tough guy. When he saw that happening in an instant, he just reached over and took her by the shoulder and shook her just a little bit and said, take it, it's for you. He said, never left him. The idea that his father was so deeply convicted of the love of God that he would communicate that to somebody, typically a young woman. The last person she's going to turn to is an Italian bricklayer and ask his advice. A young woman who, as far as the community was concerned, had disgraced herself by having a child out of wedlock. But he had such the conviction in his own life that it was so powerful that he couldn't stop himself from reaching out and just reassuring her, urging her that communion and reconciliation with her Father in heaven was that powerful, that important, that assured that she should have that confidence, the same confidence as he felt. When we think of our lives, we can communicate that We can communicate that in the same way. It says, so the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. He had experienced what we sing as amazing grace. And I didn't know the story behind that song. I just thought it was a tune. As I've teased you, a short while ago I got to actually sing it as a duet with Willie Nelson. And of course, he does a very nice job of that song. It was me and, of course, a few thousand others. But anyway, I got to sing it with Willie. But I grew up in a city in Bristol, and apparently Newton was a sea captain who sailed between West Africa and the port of Bristol and across to the New World, bringing slaves who themselves had been subjugated from one tribe to another in warfare. This is what we might call today black on black crime, where these individuals were just captured, enslaved, and sold to a white captain, who then brought them to the port of Bristol, where I grew up, and then on to the New World. And Newton did this for years, thinking of this as normal. And there were other slave traders who gave their name to certain things. I know we used to go to concerts as a child, school concerts and so forth, in the Colston Hall. I don't think it's named that anymore because somebody pointed out Colston was a slave trader, and the wealth of Bristol came from that. Colston Street, Colston Market, names that are associated with those things. And Newton came to himself in later life, and he realized what a horrible, horrible, horrible human being he had been. He had just bought and sold human beings. He transported them into slavery from the west coast of Africa, through the British Isles, over into the West Indies, over to places like Cuba, Jamaica, and on up into the southern states. And he was the one, when he came to understand how great God's grace was for him, wrote the song, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, and now am found, was blind, but now I see. And this was the same song, long before it was written by Newton, that this man sang in his life. I was blind. I was completely unaware. I couldn't even have self-awareness because someone else possessed me. I was naked, and you couldn't get more shame than that. I was living in a graveyard, and you can't get more dead than that, than hanging out with the dead. And yet he redeemed me, he healed me, he delivered me, but he delivered me for a purpose. And my life is supposed to be that light. That is the purpose for my life. As you reflect upon anything that's happened to you, any place that you've come from, any experience that you've had, any triumph that you've had, any success that you've had, any hurt that you've had, any setback you've had, then through all of these things, when you consider the miracle of Jesus' grace that comes to you, remember, in every small way, you are the city set on the hill that cannot be hidden. In every quiet way, you are the light of the world. In any way that you want to find an expression for it, it was beautiful that Christine led us as an opening song today in Shine, Jesus, Shine. Even as we beheld the face of the Savior, it shines towards us, and I believe the lyrics are, in us, it is ever changing from glory to glory. May our lives reflect that story. Sometimes you don't realize how powerfully you reflect it. Sometimes you don't realize the influence that you have, the impact that you can have. But in this time of uncertainty and stress and very different values than they were when you and I were children, you still carry the witness. In this particular case, it's a very obvious thing that takes place. Can I come with you? Can I hide with you? Can I be safe with you? And of course, Jesus sends the man away and tells him, just live the life. And so he does. In this particular case, telling all the people over town about this crazy Jew who wiped out their herd of pigs. No, this crazy Jew who saved me from nakedness and death. And that's how I experienced him. You don't quite have the same story. None of you has had demons cast out of you. I know all of you in some way or another. I don't think that's happened to any of you. But all of you have had very interesting lives. And those lives are evidence of Jesus at work with you over a long period of time. And that life is of great value since it is the light of the world that Jesus is now using. So, even though there's no drama, there are no pigs running off cliffs, and you all started off reasonably well clothed, okay, and you all look normal, nonetheless, your life in terms of a dysfunctional and dark world is of huge value because you have been redeemed, you have been saved, you've been liberated for a purpose. And that purpose is to promote and to continue the work of the kingdom of God. Let's pray. Our Father, as we try to understand this story and we try to relate to this poor, demonic, demon-possessed individual, we realize it's not too far away from our own experience. And even though our experience may be not be as dramatic and not quite as newsworthy as happened in this context, nonetheless, it is precious to you. And so as we think of another week before us, we ask that as the light of the world, you would work with us, work through us, and remind us not to be intimidated or afraid as we walk forward with you. Thank you for bringing help, strength, joy into our lives personally, but also thank you for the opportunity to share that with others who don't have that benefit, who don't have that blessing just yet. And may we be a channel, a conduit for you, the Holy Spirit, to still bring light and joy to the lives of others whom we love. And we ask this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.